It was a crisp autumn afternoon in October 1976, and Dr. Marcus Henderson was preparing for his weekly Advanced Jazz Harmony seminar at Yale University's prestigious School of Music. As one of the most respected music theory professors in the country, Dr. Henderson had spent the last 22 years teaching the theoretical foundations of jazz and contemporary music to some of America's most promising young musicians. The Advanced Jazz Harmony class was notorious among Yale music students for its intellectual rigor and Dr. Henderson's demanding teaching style. Only the most serious music majors were admitted to the seminar, and even they often found themselves struggling to keep up with the complex theoretical concepts that Dr. Henderson presented with rapid-fire precision. What Dr. Henderson didn't know as he arranged his lecture notes and prepared his piano demonstrations was that for the past 6 weeks, one of the world's most accomplished and influential guitarists had been quietly sitting in the back row of his classroom, absorbing every concept without saying a word. Eric Clapton, at 31 years old, was experiencing a period of personal and artistic introspection that had led him to step away from the constant demands of touring and recording. He had come to New Haven under an assumed name, seeking to deepen his understanding of music theory and jazz harmony in ways that his largely self-taught musical education had never provided. Eric's decision to audit classes at Yale wasn't motivated by any lack of musical ability or professional success. His work with Cream, Blind Faith, and as a solo artist had already established him as one of the most respected guitarists in rock music. But Eric had always been fascinated by the theoretical frameworks that formal music education could provide, and he wanted to understand the academic language that could help him articulate musical concepts he had always grasped intuitively. To maintain his privacy and avoid the disruption that his celebrity would inevitably cause, Eric had worked with Yale's administration to audit select classes under the name E.C. Patterson. He dressed in casual clothes, wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and positioned himself in the back corner of classrooms where he could observe and learn without attracting attention. For 6 weeks, Eric had been attending Dr. Henderson's Advanced Jazz Harmony seminar every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, fascinated by the formal analysis of chord progressions, voice leading, and harmonic substitutions that he had been using instinctively for years. He took detailed notes, followed every demonstration carefully, and absorbed the academic vocabulary that gave structure to musical concepts he had previously understood only through feel and experience. From Dr. Henderson's perspective, however, the quiet man in the back corner represented a growing source of frustration. The professor prided himself on maintaining an interactive classroom environment where students were expected to participate actively in discussions, ask probing questions, and demonstrate their understanding through verbal analysis and practical application. The anonymous auditor seemed attentive enough, always taking notes and never missing a class, but he never spoke, never asked questions, and never volunteered to participate in the practical exercises that Dr. Henderson used to assess his students' comprehension. This pattern of passive attendance was beginning to irritate the professor, who interpreted it as either lack of preparation or insufficient engagement with the material. On this particular October afternoon, Dr. Henderson had planned a lesson on advanced reharmonization techniques, specifically focusing on tritone substitutions and chromatic voice leading that could transform standard jazz progressions into sophisticated harmonic landscapes. It was challenging material that required active participation to master, and Dr. Henderson was determined to ensure that all his students, including the silent auditor, were genuinely engaging with the concepts. As the class settled in and Dr. Henderson began his presentation, he noticed that the quiet student in the back corner was, as usual, taking extensive notes, but showing no indication of wanting to participate in the discussion.
Today we're exploring how master jazz musicians transform basic 2-5-1 progressions through sophisticated harmonic thinking, Dr. Henderson announced to the 12 students in the seminar. These techniques separate amateur players from true professionals who understand the theoretical foundations of jazz improvisation. Dr. Henderson proceeded to demonstrate various reharmonization approaches at the piano, showing how simple dominant chords could be replaced with tritone substitutes, how chromatic passing chords could create smooth bass lines, and how modal interchange could add unexpected harmonic color to traditional progressions. As he taught, Dr. Henderson became increasingly aware that while most of his students were actively following along and occasionally asking clarifying questions, the man in the back corner continued his pattern of silent observation. This passive approach to learning was exactly the kind of behavior that Dr. Henderson found unacceptable in an advanced graduate seminar. About halfway through the class, Dr. Henderson reached a section of his lesson that involved particularly complex reharmonization techniques, material that he typically used to challenge even his most advanced students. He demonstrated a progression that transformed a simple 2-5-1 into something that sounded like Bill Evans or Keith Jarrett, using chord voicings and substitute harmonies that required deep theoretical understanding. These concepts might seem abstract, Dr. Henderson told the class, but they represent the difference between musicians who play notes and musicians who understand the architectural principles that govern harmonic progression. The ability to analyze and apply these techniques separates dilettantes from serious practitioners. As Dr. Henderson looked around the classroom, he noticed that several students seemed to be struggling with the complexity of what he was demonstrating. But the quiet auditor in the back corner had stopped taking notes and was sitting with his arms crossed, an expression that Dr. Henderson interpreted as disengagement or boredom. This perceived indifference triggered Dr. Henderson's decision to directly confront what he saw as unacceptable classroom behavior. "You know," Dr. Henderson said, stopping his demonstration and looking directly at Eric in the back corner, "I've noticed that we have a student who seems to believe that this material is beneath his attention." The classroom fell silent as 11 pairs of eyes turned to look at the man in the baseball cap who had suddenly become the focus of the professor's displeasure. "You, in the back," Dr. Henderson continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to demanding accountability from students. "Mr. Patterson, isn't it? You've been auditing this class for 6 weeks without saying a single word. You sit there taking notes like a court reporter, but you never engage with the material, never ask questions, never demonstrate whether you're actually learning anything." Eric looked up from his notebook, clearly surprised to find himself the center of attention in what he had hoped would remain an anonymous learning experience. "Professor Henderson," Eric said quietly, his English accent immediately noticeable to everyone in the room, "I apologize if I've seemed disengaged. I've been following along carefully." But Dr. Henderson was not satisfied with this response. In his experience, students who claimed to be following along without active participation were usually either unprepared or intellectually lazy. "Following along isn't sufficient for graduate-level study," Dr. Henderson replied sharply. "This is an advanced seminar, not a lecture hall where you can sit passively and absorb information. Either participate meaningfully in this class or stop wasting everyone's time, including your own." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Dr. Henderson had just publicly demanded that Eric prove his understanding of advanced jazz theory, with the implicit threat of exclusion if he couldn't meet the professor's standards. Eric realized that he had reached a moment where his desire for anonymity was directly conflicting with the professor's legitimate expectations for student engagement. He could either reveal more about his musical background than he had intended, or he could accept dismissal from a class that had been providing him with valuable education.
"What would you like me to demonstrate, Professor?" Eric asked, standing up from his seat in the back corner. "Come up here," Dr. Henderson said, gesturing toward the piano at the front of the classroom. "Show us your understanding of the reharmonization techniques we've been discussing.
Take this basic 2-5-1 progression in the key of G and demonstrate 3 different harmonic approaches that maintain voice-leading integrity while creating distinct emotional colors. Eric walked to the front of the classroom, aware that 12 graduate music students and 1 demanding professor were watching to see whether he could meet the academic challenge that had been placed before him. As Eric positioned himself at the piano, several students noticed the confident, purposeful way he approached the instrument, not the tentative movement of someone uncertain about his abilities, but the assured positioning of someone who had spent countless hours at keyboards. "Which specific progression would you like me to start with?" Eric asked. "A minor 7, D7, G major," Dr. Henderson replied, choosing a progression that was simple enough to analyze, but complex enough to reveal the depth of a student's harmonic understanding. Eric placed his fingers on the piano and began to play. What emerged was not the hesitant academic exercise that Dr. Henderson had expected from a reluctant student. Instead, Eric began with the basic progression and immediately started transforming it with harmonic sophistication that went far beyond anything Dr. Henderson had demonstrated in class. Eric's first reharmonization used tritone substitutions and chromatic voice leading that created a smooth, sophisticated sound reminiscent of Bill Evans' harmonic approach. His second approach incorporated modal interchange and extended harmonies that gave the progression a more contemporary, almost fusion-like quality. His third variation used chromatic bass movement and altered dominance that created tension and resolution patterns that were both theoretically sound and emotionally compelling. But it wasn't just the harmonic sophistication that was remarkable. It was the way Eric made these advanced concepts sound natural and musical rather than academic. Every chord choice seemed to serve not just theoretical principles, but emotional expression, creating harmonic progressions that were intellectually impressive, but also deeply moving. As Eric played, the atmosphere in the classroom began to change dramatically. Students who had been struggling to understand Dr. Henderson's theoretical explanations were now hearing those same concepts demonstrated with a clarity and musicality that made everything suddenly make sense. More significantly, Dr. Henderson himself was beginning to realize that something extraordinary was happening. The harmonic concepts that he had been teaching for over 2 decades were being demonstrated by this mysterious auditor with a level of mastery that suggested not just academic knowledge, but deep practical understanding that could only come from years of professional experience. Eric continued his demonstration for about 5 minutes, exploring different approaches to reharmonization that showcased not only his command of jazz theory, but also his ability to make complex harmonic ideas sound inevitable and beautiful. When he finished, the classroom was completely silent. 12 graduate students and 1 professor sat in recognition that they had just witnessed something far beyond a typical classroom exercise. Dr. Henderson was the first to speak, his voice now carrying a mixture of amazement and growing suspicion about the true identity of his mysterious auditor.
"Mr. Patterson," he said slowly, "that was extraordinary. That level of harmonic sophistication suggests years of advanced study and professional application. Where exactly did you receive your musical training?" Eric smiled and looked down at the piano keys, realizing that his attempt at anonymous education was about to end. "I've been playing professionally for a while," he said modestly, hoping to deflect further questions about his identity. But one of the students in the front row, a jazz guitar major from Berkeley, had been listening to Eric's harmonic choices and beginning to recognize something familiar about his musical approach. "Wait a minute," the student said, his voice rising with excitement and disbelief. "Are you Eric Clapton?" The name spread through the classroom immediately.
Within seconds, every student was staring at Eric with new understanding, recognizing that they had just received an impromptu masterclass from one of the most celebrated musicians of their generation. Dr. Henderson felt his academic authority suddenly transformed into profound embarrassment as he realized the magnitude of his error. He had just publicly challenged and threatened to dismiss Eric Clapton for insufficient participation in a jazz harmony class. "Mr. Clapton," Dr. Henderson said, his voice now carrying deep respect and considerable chagrin, "I had no idea. I'm profoundly sorry for questioning your engagement with the material. Clearly, you understand these concepts better than I do." Eric, characteristically gracious, shook his head and smiled. "Professor Henderson, please don't apologize. I'm here as a student, and you were absolutely right to expect participation from everyone in the class. I should have been more engaged from the beginning." "But you've just demonstrated mastery that goes far beyond what I'm teaching here," Dr. Henderson replied. "Would you be willing to share more with the class? This is an incredible learning opportunity for these students." Eric looked around at the 12 young musicians who were watching him with combinations of awe and excitement, and he recognized in their faces the same passion for musical understanding that had brought him to Yale in the first place. "If it would be helpful," Eric said, "I'd be happy to discuss how these theoretical concepts apply to practical music making, and maybe answer questions about the relationship between formal education and professional experience." What followed was one of the most extraordinary educational sessions in Yale's music department history. For the remaining 30 minutes of class time, Eric engaged with Dr. Henderson and the students in a detailed discussion of how academic music theory could serve practical musical goals, sharing insights from his professional experience while learning new theoretical vocabulary that helped him articulate concepts he had always understood intuitively. The story of Eric Clapton's surprise revelation in Dr. Henderson's jazz harmony class quickly became legendary throughout Yale's music department and eventually spread throughout the broader academic music community, representing a powerful example of how the greatest musicians never stop learning, regardless of their level of success or recognition. Dr. Henderson, for his part, learned about making assumptions regarding student engagement and different learning styles. He began incorporating more diverse approaches to participation in his future classes, recognizing that profound learning can happen through careful observation. Eric continued auditing classes at Yale for the remainder of the semester, now as an acknowledged guest. His presence enhanced the learning experience, providing unique insights into how theoretical knowledge translates into professional practice. Years later, Dr. Henderson would tell the story as a reminder that wisdom can appear in unexpected forms and that great teachers must maintain humility and recognize learning opportunities wherever they arise. Sometimes the most valuable education comes from admitting you still have something to learn, regardless of who you are.